Hi, my name is Adelina Rivera, and today's presentation will be about teaching vocabulary. This is a quote from Timothy Shanahan, a retired professor and author of over 200 publications. Studies suggest that the number of repetitions needed to learn a word is 10 to 15 times with lots of variation. This means that students need to see, hear, use, and write the word in different formats to really learn the word and make it their own. I begin this presentation with the quote because I want to emphasize the need we have as educators to increase and improve our instruction of vocabulary. In this presentation, I will share why and how we can develop vocabulary instruction. To be more specific, the learning goals for this presentations are: one, I will point out what research says about vocabulary learning for students. Two, I will outline methods to indirect instruction of vocabulary, or really how students learn vocabulary indirectly and in organic ways. Three, on the other side of that spectrum, I will also share a few examples of direct instruction strategies. Lastly, I will share multiple resources, including a handout with the different ways of incorporating vocabulary before, during, or after a content lesson. Vocabulary instruction is for all students, as you will see in the upcoming slides. But in terms of our EL students specifically, I really want to stress that they must learn English, not just learn in English. This supports WIDA's development of language and academic features. We have to be proactive in teaching higher level concepts, more content language structures, and new words in order for students to learn English. Although vocabulary is only one feature of academic language, it is key to reading comprehension. Students cannot understand what they are reading without knowing what most of the words mean. As children learn to read more advanced texts, they must learn the meaning of new words that are not part of their oral vocabulary. So let's begin with digging into the research. As educators, we know the impact that language proficiency has on academic success, but we rarely review the data to reflect on our own instruction and revitalize what and how we spend our time on when we are teaching. One well-known research from Hart and Risley has identified the vocabulary gap between students of different economic status. On the left side of this chart, you can see the range of words children hear by the age of 3 compared to other students in a different economic status range. The right side shows the difference in the number of words those children know and use as their own. The implications of this study is enormous. If students don't know the words, how can we expect them to use them or read them? How can we prompt them in our small reading groups and ask them, does it sound right? Does it look right? Does it make sense? This really reinforces and strikes on the importance of oral language in the classroom. Another well-known research is the impact of reading to develop vocabulary. Did you know that young children whose parents read them 5 books a day enter kindergarten having heard about 1.4 million more words than children who were never read to? Take a few seconds to think about how many of your students currently or in the years past fall into this category. Look at the difference between children who are read to 1 to 2 times a week versus those children that are read to 3 to 5 times a week. This data should force us to reflect on how we can help make up for that gap in our classrooms. This is why I hope you take the information I share with you today and build upon your current practice of vocabulary instruction. Research on vocabulary instruction shows us that most vocabulary is actually learned indirectly, and that some vocabulary must be taught directly. Since most vocabulary is learned indirectly, we have to make sure we are using a combination in our classrooms of both indirect approaches and direct approaches. Indirect vocabulary learning means that children learn the meanings of most words through 3 everyday experiences. and those are engaging in oral language, as we mentioned earlier, as they listen to adults read to them, and when they read on their own. On the following slide, you will see a few examples of how we can, as classroom teachers, increase these opportunities in our classroom through our classroom setup and routines and communication with families. As mentioned in the previous slide, one of the best ways that children can learn vocabulary indirectly is by listening to read alouds. The way that we can, as teachers, increase read alouds in classes to make it a routine of the classroom rotations, maybe as part of your transitions between activities or subjects. It can also be done with specific small groups with your guided reading. You can also pre-record books and have students listen to a book. This is probably a little time consuming, but it's a great way to invite the community and colleagues to get involved and volunteer their time. You can also send letters home to parents and communications through a newsletter or parent-teacher conferences, reminding them and encouraging them that they should be reading to their child. And yes, it can be in their home language. Sometimes our families don't do this, not because they don't want to, but simply because they don't know the positive impact that it will have on their child's learning and education. Maybe they weren't read to, so we need to rectify this by encouraging families to read to their child. In some situations, maybe they aren't able to read to their child, so sharing when public libraries host read alouds for specific ages would be good information to send home to parents as well, and then they can just take them to the read aloud at the library. Something that I have not seen in a very long time is the collaboration of having like classroom buddies with the older grade, or if you're an older grade, with the younger grades, and inviting them to read together. If you're in a higher grade, you can have your students read to the younger students. This will increase their reading time, and it lowers their resistance to reading because they become the stronger reader automatically. When children are read to, they not only learn new words, but expand their knowledge on a specific content. Other ways you can increase learning vocabulary indirectly is by having a word board. When I taught second grade, I had a bulletin board where we would read Fancy Nancy books, and we would add them on index cards, and then students would also add their own words as they read independently. For upper grades, you can outline a door with like the fun tape and have students add the index cards of new words that they learned that week from the different subjects. For middle school students, a variation of this is as they're walking into your classroom, right, whenever we go back to face instruction, is to project a screen with a new word every day. And an easy way to do this is to use the Webster Dictionary word of the day. And if these are too difficult, you can also find your own words or have students submit a slide to post every day. And then just a final reminder, in connecting to Stephen Krashen's theory of affective filter, we know that children learn best from personal interactions with families and caregivers. So we should always be cognizant of how we interact with our students. Just because a student is an EL student and learning language, we shouldn't lower our vocabulary when we are speaking to them. We just have to explain what the words mean. By second grade, a child in the middle of the family income spectrum will know on average 6,020 words. A child in the bottom 25th percent of the income range will know just 4,168 words. This gap is caused in part by a lack of exposure to adult conversation in low-income households. To make up for the gap in vocabulary knowledge, we need to do more direct instruction throughout the school day. So we will now review some examples of what this may look like in your classroom. Direct instruction of vocabulary definitely leads to better reading comprehension. We all know this. Today, we're going to focus on the vocabulary for a specific content. This could be math or science, not necessarily in an ELA lesson. And direct instruction includes providing students with instructions in specific words that are important to the content or understanding. We do this all the time, but the missing piece is the interaction of students with those words after. Students have to learn word learning strategies, and we can teach them those word learning strategies. And this can be in part, as you will see later in the presentation, identifying morphemes and meanings of word parts, identifying cognates, or learning how to correctly use a thesaurus or a dictionary. Johns Hattie's work in measuring the effect size of 150 school practices or teacher strategies tells us that anything that receive a higher effect size of 0.40 is significant in student learning. Vocabulary programs or instruction is given a effective size of 0.67. That is huge. This is why direct vocabulary instruction is ranked 17th out of 150 school practices that he researched. However, it isn't just teachers telling students what words mean, right? But teachers involving students when they realize they don't know a word. So teaching those students how to learn unknown words, how to make meaning based on how authors write and embed context clues in the text. You also can involve students in their own learning by having them keep records of the new words that they are gaining each day. They can also share their words and what they believe the word means with their peers. As we know, self-awareness is key for students to continue their development of vocabulary and their own learning. They should understand how rubrics work so that they can rate their own understanding. This is like the metacognition piece, where they have to understand how they learn and how well they learn and what works for them. Here on the slide, you will see 4 strategies that students can make part of their vocabulary learning process. We have word sorts, videos, pictures, and self-define. So with word sorts, we know that there's 2 forms of sorts. There's an open sort, which means that students are given a set of words and then they sort them into different categories. And then they have to explain why they were grouped that way. There's also closed sorts when the teacher tells the students how to sort them by specific categories. So for example, you can give students a set of word cards and then have them sort into words I know versus words I don't know. And then they can track that after the lesson and see what are new words that they have gained. Another closed sort activity could be sorting by categories. If you're learning about animal adaptations, maybe you want to start off with just students understanding the different categories of animals, like mammals, reptiles, and birds. So I find that those hands-on activities where students are moving cards around, especially if they're working with a partner, also increases oracy opportunities before or after a lesson. Videos are also a great way to develop understanding of a new word. If you show a video of the word being used in context, the students can kind of use the visuals to make meaning. And when I think about this, I immediately think about BrainPop. BrainPop has a wealth of videos, very short videos, right, that you can show so that students understand specific vocabulary or concepts before giving instruction on that concept. And pictures. In this strategy, we're not thinking about the picture and the word match, although that's right away what you think of, but really of having students create a visual that's non-linguistic, right? So a picture, a symbol, a chart, a map, something that they themselves come up with so that when they see the word, they have that This helps them to keep in long-term memory, and that's very powerful, which is why we see this as part of many vocabulary strategies, including one of Marzano's 6 steps method of learning vocabulary. Here is an example of a vocabulary journal I used to use with my students. They would keep a journal of all new words they found as they read. Sometimes I would give them specific words to add to their vocabulary journal, but part of this was that we followed the 6 step method of learning vocabulary, and part of it was writing the word down, having them kind of write what their own words to define. That's that other strategy, self-define, and then coming up with a picture to represent that word. Another strategy that uses pictures to learn new words is Foursquare. I think we're all familiar with this strategy because it really works. For example, here we have the word harbor, and there are 4 different tasks that students need to complete to make connections and make meaning for that word. However, one reason that teachers probably don't use this strategy is that it could take up a lot of time, right? So, how long would it take for a student to complete a Foursquare activity for 5 words? I'm not sure if we are willing to sacrifice that every time we're introducing new words or that they're finding new words as they read. So, one way to modify it, the strategy is to create and make it a collaborative opportunity with other students. This would increase oral language time. It would also allow for students to do more words than one. Students can be assigned to a specific task, for example. Let's say that this is the word for a specific table of students. Students who are assigned number 1 would be responsible for the definition. 2s would do the brainstorming section of the Foursquare, which would be kind of like a word association. 3s would write a sentence with the word, and then 4s would draw a non-linguistic symbol or picture for it. So you can have them do multiple. Maybe as a small group, they would each do 3. If you have 4 tables in your classroom and each are doing 3 words, now you have 12 words. You can then post them on a word wall and or around the room and have students do a carousel walk. So going back to self-define, this is one is that I think is very easy, but sometimes it's not done enough. I think we should always remember to give students that time and opportunity to share their word list, to share their vocabulary journal or their Foursquare that they created. Let's see if who remembers from earlier in the presentation how many times we need to hear, say, write, or read a word before it becomes our own. Okay, so if you said 10 to 15 times, you're absolutely correct. Repetition is important for learning new words. This is the perfect time to build in that think, pair, share, having students engage in conversation and discussing what words are. And as we know, this is particularly important for our EL students who need to develop those speaking skills. So here are 4 more strategies, and I've identified concept map or concept chart. One way to teach word meaning in depth is to have students make connections. Let me show you an example. In this example, we see that the student had to write what the word means, right? The word in the middle is the vocabulary word predator. And then they had to also give some examples of what a predator would be and describe kind of what it is like. And this is actually a higher level thinking because they're making comparisons. Word wall. So everyone has word walls in their room, right? I know this is hard to do while we're teaching remotely, but when we are back in our classrooms, you can walk into any classroom, K-5, I'm not sure about high school, but definitely middle school, where we have word walls. This strategy is probably not easy to keep up with because it's meant to be changed and updated based on the content and subject that you're currently teaching, which is why it's great to kind of modify it into anchor charts. But the important part of word walls that I want to talk to you today is that you should have time for activities where students are using the words from the word walls, right? So this can be done by assigning a writing activity and making part of the expectations that they use a specific number of words, content specific words from the word wall. I'm not talking about high frequency words, right? We're talking about those higher vocabulary words that students need that repetition of practice. Another activity that can be done is to make it a center or a game based around the word walls. I don't know if you ever, I don't know what the actual name of it is called, but we used to have like buzzwords, like we would put all the words in a jar as we were learning them, and students would play like read and say or use the word. And then if they pulled a card that had like a star or a pop, they lost all the words that they collected and they would go back in the jar. So activities like that where you are having them use the words, practice, and increase that repetition would be good. The next one is that morphemic awareness. And morphemes are like the word parts that have meaning, right? We can go into like a big explanation, but for example, we have the base word, root words, prefixes, suffixes. And like for the little ones in primary grades, we can show them how we can add a suffix to a word. It changes the meaning of a word. So, for example, in these list of words, we have the word jump, and then we add the different endings and it changes the meaning of the word. So, having a conversation of what's the difference between jump and jumped and jumping? How does the ing change the meaning of the word based on that suffix? For our upper grades, we can do this by focusing on using the Latin words. For example, maybe port, which means to carry. How many words do you think you can list that have this as a root word? Right? There's plenty. And then games. In this last one is to have students play games. And I kind of connected that to that word wall earlier, that allow for use of pronunciation, vocabulary meanings, and definitions. But I'm really talking about games that you can go to the store and just bring it into your classroom, like Pictionary, Memory, Jeopardy, charades, pyramid, bingo. One of my own kids' favorite is apples to apples. So kids really like using these, and they really develop that oral language, collaboration, and positive learning environment in your classroom. So I hope that you learned at least one new strategy or activity that you can embed for indirect or direct learning of vocabulary, and that you can apply it right away with your students. If you still want to learn more, I am linking a few resources on this slide that either reference what I already presented in today's presentation, but definitely there is many more activities you can explore on your own. I especially want to point out this article. This one references Teaching Shades of Meaning, which is so important for our multilingual learners. Lastly, you can access the handout right there at the bottom right. That includes strategies mentioned in the presentation, but they're organized based on when ideally you will get the most out of them, whether it's before, during, or after a lesson. Before I leave you, I do want you to listen to this great book. It's called excuse me, it's called The Word Collector by Peter Hamilton Reynolds. It's a beautiful picture book that you can use to remind students that you don't need to list all your words, but that new words are around us all the time. As language teachers, we have an enormous and important job in helping our students learn English, and I hope that we remember that every day. Thank you for watching.
And now, the word collector. Written and illustrated by Peter Hamilton Reynolds. Collectors collect things. Some people collect stamps. Some people collect coins. Others collect rocks. Some collect art. Some collect bugs. Others collect baseball cards. Some people collect comic books. And Jerome? What did he collect? Jerome collected words. He collected words he heard. My trip to Peru was perfectly pleasant. Certain words caught his attention. He collected words he saw. Willow Tea Shop. Certain words jumped out at him. He collected words he read. Emerald. Certain words popped off the page. Short and sweet words. Spark. Bloom. Drift. Dream. Two-syllable treats. Treasure. Motif. Whisper. Glimmer. Hover. Candid. And multi-syllable words that sounded like songs. Geometry. Guacamole. Kaleidoscope. Wonderful. Symphony. There were words he did not know the meaning of at first, but they were marvelous to say. Aromatic. Vociferous. Effervescent. There were words whose sounds were perfectly suited to their meaning. Molasses. Tyrannosaurus Rex. Torrential. Smudge. Bellow. Jerome filled his scrapbooks with more and more of his favorite words. Jerome's collection grew. Blissful. Timber. Potential. Everlasting. Lore. Brilliant. Harmony. Breeze. Jerome's collection grew. He began organizing them. Dreamy. Sad. Action. Poetic. One day, while transporting them, Jerome slipped and his words went flying. As he began to pick them up, he noticed his collections had become jumbled. Big words next to little words. Sad words next to dreamy words. Lost turmeric. Dream cloud. Royal flock. Infinitesimal star. Blue harmony. Silent orchestra. Jerome began stringing words together. Words he had not imagined being side by side. Whisper. Symphony. Electric. Peace. Savor. Dreams. Cascading stars. He used his words to write poems. He used his poems to make songs. They moved. They delighted. Some of his simplest words were his most powerful. I understand. I'm sorry. Thank you. You matter. Jerome eagerly collected more and more of his favorite words. Vision. Waterfall. Brilliance. infinite hugs. Molecule, peace. Brother, light. Bungalow, bohemian. Harmony, gaggle. Onomatopoeia, thanks. The more words he knew, the more clearly he could share with the world what he was thinking, feeling, and dreaming. One breezy afternoon, Jerome climbed the highest hill, pulling a wagon packed with his word collection. He smiled as he emptied his collection of words into the wind. He saw children in the valley below, scurrying about collecting words from the breeze. Jerome had no words to describe how happy that made him. Reach for your own words. Tell the world who you are and how you will make it better. Peter Hamilton Reynolds.